Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show where I talk about dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Family Law. Great episode, a lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, this case revolves around a couple where the husband is trying to get custody of the children because he feels like the wife, she spends more time in the video game Second Life, which is an actual game. Is that still around? I know that was, I thought, maybe it's just because I think that's a video game that's been around like for ages. I didn't know that was still around. Or maybe it's maybe it's just using the same title and it's not the same game I'm thinking of, but I think it is. It's a game I never played, but it's one of those things you know exists, you just never played yourself. Either way, she spends more time in that, and the fact is that she's actually having an affair with someone, but then we start getting into the conversation of like, is it really an affair? It's like, well, emotional affairs still count because you are kind of like they're obviously feeling you are virtually having sex with someone else. I mean, it's literally the same thing as it's literally online sex, so it still counts because it's outside of like the marriage and stuff. It's a whole technicality. But I even love Abigail's like, wait, because by her father's standards, it's like, oh, it's not an affair. But then Abby's like, okay, so if you were having phone sex with someone while you were still with any one of our mothers, would you not count that as cheating? He's like, no. And she's like, and that's why you will die alone. And he was like, cute. Which is so sad because, like, Daniel literally kind of threw that thing in her face, too, about, well, because she's poking fun at him and Danielle's relationship. And then it's this whole situation of, how she'll kind of be alone especially because even Lucy throws it in his face that he kind of like moves on from relationship to relationship, saying like, oh, like that the common law won't even come close to taking place, which I'm not well versed in the law, but if I'm not mistaken, because it's something I've heard come up before, I want to say common law is basically when you've lived with someone, a partner, for a significant other for so long that you might not be married, but in the eyes of the law, it could pretty much be counted as you being married. I don't know if that's a common thing throughout the U.S. at the very least, because I mean, this is a Canadian show, so I'm assuming it's taking place in Canada. I actually don't know. I'd assume so, but I don't know if that's like common practice all across Canada. I don't even know if that's common practice all across the U.S. I don't know if that's something that like varies from like state to state type of situation. I want to say it's like at least 10 years, but maybe it's like actually 7. But 10 years seem right to me, but I could be wrong. But yeah, you're basically, in the eyes of the law, you're basically treated as the same thing as like a married couple because you're living under the same household, and I think it also depends on like if your bank accounts are connected and stuff like that. Like a married couple typically would, just without the actual marriage certificate and stuff. Then you're almost basically seen as a married couple in the eyes of the law. It's a whole thing. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing. One tidbit of the, and I once again could be 100% wrong, but that's just my basic understanding of common law. But I could be mistaken. And it is kind of messed up that Lucy would have a pull for whether or not her brother is going to break up with his current girlfriend. Which adds layers to it because because to me, I was so surprised like how nonchalant Lucy is about like, well, she cheated on her, like, I think, yeah, this is her wife. And I'm like, but I'm like, well, I don't know why I'm being so shocked because I don't know. I guess because you see Lucy and you would think like, I guess almost like because she has her therapist, she's basically she serves as kind of a therapist at the company. So I'm like, it is the thing of like, right, people are their own, like, doctors are the worst patients type of situation. So maybe the same thing applies. There's like, just because you can give advice to people doesn't mean you always necessarily follow it. I mean, no one's perfect. Everyone's got their flaws and their issues. So. But to me, in my head, I was like, man, she seems so nonchalant about it. I'm like, oh, that's an affair for you. It's like, you're going to pretend like everything's normal, everything's fine. And it's like, because I started thinking throughout the episode, I was like, you don't think it's a situation where they have an open relationship or something like that. And at first I was, because in my head, I couldn't rationalize her being so nonchalant. But I'm like, why am I thinking that? It's like an affair is going to be nonchalant because you want to make it seem like everything's above board, that everything's okay. So. but that's why I'm saying, like, even like the pull about like Daniel breaking up with his girlfriend, it's like that seems extra. Even because even Abigail's like, wow, Daddy's little girl ends up has kind of a mean streaker, and she's like, yeah, like I get paid like half that Daniel gets paid. It's like, well, I don't even get paid half of what Daniel pays, so like, okay, put me down for the 11th. So I just thought it was interesting. Daniel found out and was not too happy. I think that in correlation might play a role in things later on. Once again, I do know there are at least one or two scenes that are removed from episodes on the CW, like when because they, I guess, edit for time or whatever. So I do know that there might be an extra scene in this episode that's only in the Canadian version and not the US version of the episode, which is baffling and weird to me, but what can you do? Either way, getting back to the main case, because I mean, it's still like, it all correlates, it's all connected, is the fact is that the wife, Marley, she has to be monitored, and it seems like, oh my god, you're only on the computer for 2 hours, but they find out, well, in actuality, she's on one of her children's computers, and she was up there for like 16 hours. She has an addiction to this game and stuff. And when Abigail ended up really talking to her, you find out like her and Dwight, like they're nerds. That's how they actually like got together and stuff like that. Because her character is like based on like a very specific comic or something like that. And her character in Second Life and stuff. And she's like, right, they like, they bonded over him, like basically saying like, I love you, and like Vulcan and stuff. Like, they're true blue nerds. And so, hasn't the actress who plays Abigail been in something like really like, because I think I saw a picture of her at Comic-Con. I'm like, isn't there something like really nerdy that she's associated with? I can't place it. I remember looking at her filmography and finding out, like, yeah, because I've seen her in stuff before. God, I'm going to butcher her last name. I know her first name's Joel. Was it? Oh, God. Joel Stady? I might be, like, butchering her name. Either way, it might just be, like, State, like, because there's an I in it, so it might be like a silent I, so it might just be like State. It might be how you pronounce that. Either way, like, I do know, I feel like she's probably been a part of like something like nerdy, because I think I've seen pictures of her at Comic-Cons. Either way, so I just think that's kind of extra funny, but it's like, right, they had kids and things have changed. Like, he's not romancing her. It's not, that spark isn't there like it used to be, and so she feels like, okay, life is kind of like gotten boring, and she's bored, and she's boring, and so she feels exciting, like, you know, having that, like, that fun and that chemistry with someone else, because she's not getting it at home. I mean, truth be told, that's what an affair usually is. It usually stems from, like, sadly, there's something that's not as fulfilling in your relationship that you're looking for elsewhere. It doesn't make it okay, but, you know, understanding why someone, you know, there's usually a reason for that. You know, I mean, I think you can sometimes, like, I think that's at the very least at the top of the list. I think you could usually break it down from person to person, their reasons for cheating, but I feel like that's probably a general enough. I mean, once again, every situation's different, every situation's unique, but still. And that's what this is all about. And Abby didn't give her the best advice, because Abby's coming at it from the perspective of, hey, I've got it figured out. Yeah, I'm in therapy. I'm also having to go into meetings and stuff like that. And, you know, it's like, right, it's all for show. And the sad thing is, she doesn't try because she doesn't believe she needs it. That's the problem. You'll never, you can't help someone if they, you know, at least that's the adage of, like, you can't help someone who doesn't want to help themselves type of situation or something. Or at least, I mean, I don't like that adage as much, but it's more so like, you can't help someone who doesn't believe there's a problem. She doesn't think there's a problem there. She's like, yeah, my drinking, like, it wasn't that big of a deal, you know. She even says, like, right, she feels like she got screwed over in a situation with Frank, because he's like, it was both of our faults. I started drinking because of the affair, and that's where things really got bad. But the way Frank talked about it seemed like she was already, I mean, she has all the family issues in the world, so her drinking probably was Frank made it seem like in the first episode her drinking was already an issue, and obviously it got worse after she found out about the affair. So I think it's just, it's already there to some extent, and she hasn't properly equipped herself to deal with it, because she doesn't believe it's, because what we see, like, she's at her AA meeting, what she's working. She's also canceling all her therapy sessions because she's like, I don't need it. Like, talk to someone about my problems. Yeah, right. Sadly, therapy is still like that to some people. They think like, oh man, like, who am I? I don't really need to talk to a therapist. And then she even said like, yeah, I stopped cold turkey, like, because she doesn't see herself as an addict, and she is. Like, that isn't something you can just quit. Like, you're always going to be an addict, and that, I mean, some people can make it work. I don't want to talk in generalization, but I feel like most people, like, you do need help with that. It's not the easiest thing, because she doesn't even have, like, a sober companion type of thing, or, like, in that regard. I feel like, I mean, maybe that's not, like, a common enough practice, having a sober companion type of situation. But the fact is that she tried to quit cold turkey, and she gave Marley that advice, and it was kind of, treating like the therapy and the whole, like, not gaming, like, yeah, do all the therapy and all the meetings and stuff like that. That's just for optics, quit cold turkey. And it's like, that's not good advice, because you giving someone that advice ends up, they'll just double down, triple down, even harder. It's it's going to be easier for them to relapse, and we see that in this episode. We'll get to that later, but yeah. And Abigail sadly stumbles her way through trying to make everything okay, trying to make up, like, for her mistakes, because she's like, all right, so I told you to do this, I kind of gave you bad advice. You know what? I'm going to make you meet the person you've been flirting with in the game, and they're not going to be that great. She meets him, and he's handsome, because Abigail had this idea of, like, oh yeah, like, the stereotypical gamer is like, oh, he lives in his mom's basement, he's a basement dweller type of, like, oh, he's probably gross and everything. It's like, oh, he's actually pretty handsome. Once again, the old stereotype, I think, of, like, what gamers look like, I guess, especially in this situation. But it's like, no, turned out he was kind of, a handsome enough dude that even she was kind of taken back by. And it's kind of like, cool, things kind of fell apart on that front. And so her husband Dwight was not too happy about it, because it is that thing of, you don't appreciate what you have until it's gone, because he was doing all this, but it's also because he was like, he legitimately was worried about his children, but I think it was also jealousy. It was like, right, like, she's spending all this time flirting with someone else, we're married and stuff like that. But the problem is, like, now it's like, oh, like, the person who he was hoping that, I guess he was hoping maybe he was just sad and angry. I think he was kind of lashing out with this whole, like, custody thing. But then it turns out, like, oh, now, like, you ruined everything. Maybe we could have fixed things. And that's what Lucy was trying to do, fix their relationship. Which, once again, I find that so ironic, considering what's going on in her own relationship. But I think that's kind of, like, supposed to be the poetic irony of it, is in fact that. Like I said, once again, not unless we find out that they have an open relationship, and this show's just painting it to try and make you think it's not like that, when in actuality it is. Or maybe it is just like, no, they don't. I mean, yeah, she's having, like, the still secret texts and stuff like that, but it could be a thing of, they have an open relationship and she's just never acted upon it before, and now she is. Or maybe it's part of their game. I don't know. I could be reading way too much into it. It may just simply be like, no, it's an affair. There's no, like, element. There's nothing else to it. It could just be that it is what it is, right? Because of this whole situation, Daniel getting, like, candy through in his eye or whatever, it's like, well, Abigail kind of screwed the pooch on this situation, but even her dad's like, yeah, but what she said about, like, using, like, oh, him being violent and kind of raging like that could still be something you could use in your back pocket. So they were able to come up with a deal where it was more of an amicable split, for custody, 60-40, at least for now, because she still is the stay-at-home mom and everything. But it didn't sit well with Marley, despite everything, because for her, it's like, oh, now it means everything really is over. In that moment, Abigail's like, wow, Lucy was right. She legitimately loved her husband. She just wanted him to see her. And so Abigail gets super loud just so that Dwight can overhear, like, right, that she's still in love with you, but it's like, right, because there is a conflict of interest that get in the middle of that. So, try to, like, course correct the whole situation. And Dwight shows up in in cosplay form and tries to woo her. And it's like, oh, let's go on vacation together. Let's go to Comic-Con together. And it's like, let me see you. It's like the kids are with your mom. And I love that he tried to do a romantic thing of picking her up and you kind of hear his back pop. Marlo's like, are you okay? He's like, yeah. And he just like walk out the court together. It was really sweet. It was beautiful. So that kind of had a happy ending. And it's interesting how, other elements of the episode play out. Like, for example, we have Daniel proposing to Danielle instead of breaking up with her, which it seemed like that's what he was going to do. That's why I'm wondering, was there, because she's like, oh, because I don't know what you said to him, Lucy, but that's why I'm like, because it seemed like he was like, oh, I have something to talk to you about. You're like, oh man, are you really breaking up with her? But it's like, no, it turns out he was going to propose to her. Now, either that was a scene that wasn't shown in the CW version of the episode where Lucy actually talked to Daniel and that conversation came up, or maybe which isn't the best reason to do it either, but maybe it's because of his sister having a pull at the office about when he's going to break up with his girlfriend. Maybe that spurred that on, that is not a good enough reason to propose. I don't know if that's the reasoning, which with the context of this episode it feels like it, but once again there could have been a scene between Lucy and Daniel that could have like pushed him more so to proposing to Danielle, but we'll see. Because that's not going to end well if that was his reasoning for getting engaged, just to kind of prove something to anyone else. So once again, everyone's got their issues. Abigail's in this episode, obviously continuing after everything with her son last episode. It's like, yeah, she's like, yeah, I might not be able to go onto the school property, but this is a sidewalk, so it's public property, so I won't get in trouble. So, and I love that she sees that little kid and kind of gives him the death stare, kind of points at her eyes and points at him, like, I see you, kid. So the kid kind of runs for his life a little bit. I also love that she caught Sophie skipping school, but it's like, all right, I'm going to have to tell your dad this is what I'm going to have to do. It's like, cool. How about if you don't, I will go to that dinner with you and Nico. And she's like, all right, fine. It's like, wow, that is sad that you got, and I was almost hoping she would do but it's like, right, you take whatever you can get, because Sophie's been very confrontational to some extent. So, but either way, ultimately, she ended up skipping school, and I was like, oh, that's bad. I was like, oh, God, is it really going to be about the boyfriend thing? I was like, your mom warned you about him, because she's like, yeah, like kids that age, they only care about one thing, and that was their penises and stuff like that. It's kind of what he's thinking with, is what she was saying. So, but it turns out she was going through her period, and she already lied to her friends and said, like, oh, that's already happened because she got her so late. I was like, oh, man. I never thought about something like that. It's like, because I feel like I have heard, I don't know if in real life, but like in TV shows, but I'm like, oh, is that something that does happen? Like girls have because it probably is a thing of like, right, because they're kind of entering the next stage of, it feels weird to say that about like kids. Like, oh, the next stage of like, you're getting older, and now it's like, oh, I was about to say adulthood, but that's weird to say, but it's like more so like you're getting older, so you feel like you're being left behind, and now it's like, oh, you don't want your friends to see like you're panicking, so you left because you don't want to end up bleeding through your skirt. But her mom was there because it's like, right, she couldn't really talk to her dad about it. Her dad didn't have any products, and it's like, no, it's all going to be okay. And later on, Abigail brings her a book about it, but she's like, Mom, geez, I'm not 10. And she kind of snaps at her. It's like 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Because it seemed like her and Sophie were making progress because of this, but then it's just kind of a thing of, nope, kind of took a step back because she's like, I'm not a baby. It's like, well, she's trying to handle things. Like, you are so foreign to her now, you're older, it hasn't been that long, but now it's like you've been out of her reach for a while, and obviously anytime you're together, there's such animosity you have towards your mom, and then you add in the, like every time they're around each other, she makes snide remarks about her mom and everything. Once again, you're a teenager, you probably don't know you don't know that much about being sympathetic or even empathetic, because once again, kids and teenagers suck so much. But so there's that, and even Abigail once again has her addictions. Not even just to alcohol, but the fact is she's hurting herself because she's keeping an eye on the woman of Felicity that Frank had an affair with, and keeps checking it out, like her social media, whatever, because she's coming up, she's going like her and Frank are going to be in the same like meeting thing. It's going to be like some kind of convention thing that they're going to be at in the same time, and she's worried, so she's asking Frank like, hey, like I've got my therapy receipts, which her therapist dumped her because she kept canceling because she's like, oh, it's not fair to waste my time or the time of the patients who are on that waiting list. So boom. Plus, she's got her sobriety chip, one month sobriety chip, but she's not really taking it as seriously as she should. So you add in him also saying like, right, like let's revisit this conversation about you and your sobriety here at the house after 3 months, which at first I'm like, okay, I get it, because once again he said the affair happened because she was already kind of drinking. There were already issues beforehand. So part of me is like, right, he's like, when you were in this environment, it still allowed you to drink and stuff like that. So I want to make sure like, okay, you're in the right direction first before I bring you back fully around the kids and we try this again. I think especially with this case where Dwight and Marlene kind of are willing to give it another shot and work things out, that it probably like sparked that in her, like maybe we could give it another shot. But the problem is because she like keeps an eye on Felicity, she ends up seeing that Frank ended up responding, which I'm also like, I can only assume she knows for a fact that is Frank's social media. Like the fact is that that she was following that and everything. So like she has to know for sure that, because not unless that's a different Frank or something, or not unless someone else is responding from his social media, I don't know. That seems, not so good. Not like I said, not unless that's one of the kids or something doing that. Like not unless I don't think that would be Nico, could be, but not unless it's Sophie trying to like confront the woman or something like that. I don't know. But either way, it's enough to send her spiraling a little bit, because it's like, oh, because she was hoping like, oh, like it's almost like getting cheated on all over again. Now it's like, oh, here you are. I mean, because like they're kind of separated right now, but they're not divorced. But now it's like, oh, you're potentially going back to the woman you had an affair with. You were making it seem like it was never going to happen again, and now it's that, especially when she was like, oh, I'm trying my best, and I felt like I was making progress, and I thought we could make it work, but now it seems like that's not the case. Then she goes in, finds out about Daniel and Danielle, and it's just like, that's a blow. And then Cecil making a remark about like, oh, sure, you can't wait to have grandchildren or something like that. And it's like, I already have grandchildren too. And he's like, oh yeah, I kind of forgot. Cecil's like, I forget that Abigail's your daughter. It's like, understandably so, because he doesn't treat her like the family. So, and that just makes her feel even more ostracized, and she just kind of goes off on her own yet again. And it's so heartbreaking. And then the ending when she's there alone, you're like, oh God, you're like, she's going to drink, she's going to relapse, and she does. Because once again, she doesn't have the it's going to, even with the proper foundation, it's going to be hard regardless, and it's coming from someone who's never personally experienced like having a vice like that, being an addict in that regard. But the fact is that, at the very least, having the proper tools can make it at least harder to like find yourself in that relapse situation. It's still going to be possible no matter, even if you have that foundational setup, it's still going to be hard. It's a possibility, but you at least lessen yourself and prepare yourself that even with the down pits of life, like when you're kind of down, that you don't end up relapsing. And she did. It didn't take just one drink. She kept going and going and going. And lo and behold, she ends up passing out on the couch, and her father finds her. So the question is, what is she going to do? Because she even tried to go back to ask her, because she felt unappreciated at the job. She's constantly having her dad throw the fact is like, oh, you haven't even thanked me for like whatever menial work I give you, you should be grateful for, because you've never thanked me for the fact is that I've given you this job. So why should I thank you for doing what you're supposed to do? And so there's already a contentious relationship there, and he sees her, and I don't know what he's going to do next episode. Is he going to try to do the thing of like, I'm a cover for you, or is he going to straight up just fire her and let her go? I mean, Daniel's already saying as much. Lucy hasn't said as much. It's mainly been a Daniel thing of him being like, oh, you shouldn't keep her around anymore. So, she's not felt welcomed regardless. Yeah, like her personality clashes very much with her family's, but she's very kind of, maybe a little sarcastic me because of the law she was handling beforehand kind of calls her to be like that, but also just, maybe her upbringing and just like her outlook on life. Like, she just probably just naturally has a very sarcastic personality, and she does kind of crap on other people's happiness because I think just because everything she's going through right now. So it is easier to kind of deflect onto other people's issues rather than kind of, deal with your own sometimes. So, yeah, because like I said, even her boss is like, yeah, you could get your job back when hell freezes over, because it's like, right, because now all their previous clients are like, yo, was she drunk when she lost my case? But she was like, I haven't lost that many cases. Like, I only lost maybe like a handful of cases. And then it's like, oh, now also your last client, the one she threw up at before losing her job, that one is now suing that firm. So he's like, yeah, her boss has no intention of bringing her back. But I think eventually things will circle back around at some point where it's like, oh, you're doing so well, we want to hire you back. I think it might be that, and she will have to choose. We'll see. But yeah, I figured she was going to hit bottom. Because even that wasn't rock bottom. Because I forgot who quoted. It's someone I'm quoting who basically said like, hitting rock bottom isn't always enough to like really fit. Like, you might for some people, hitting rock bottom is enough to change things around. Not for everyone. You could hit rock bottom and still find yourself like repeating that cycle, caught in that cycle. So that might have been her rock bottom before. This might be her rock bottom now. Who knows? But I didn't expect her to hit it in like episode 3. I figured it'd be a good chunk into the season beforehand, but it's like, nope, she's hit it now in episode 3. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where the next episode ultimately ends up taking us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.